This is the IDP After Show.
Hello and welcome to the IDP After Show with me, your host, Jase Abbey. As always, I'm excited to bring you the IDP preview episode, where I'll be joined by the best IDP bods in the business to focus on a combination of players we think have some of the best and worst weekly matchups. You guys are in luck this week, as helping me break down what week 11 has to offer is one of the head honchos at the IDP Show, Mr. Josh Raymer himself. Josh, I am stoked to have you with me tonight. How are things, my friend?
Doing great, Jase. You are too kind. You bring such a nice touch of British class, right, to the IDP Show enterprise. We're Kentucky boys. Like, we're rednecks, right? Like, we say y'all and eat cornbread and drink sweet tea. And you just bring that sophistication that we need with this brand and with this team. So delighted to have you doing the after show, man. Happy to jump on and talk about the week 11 preview. It's going to be fun.
I've never been called classy or sophisticated, but I'm going to take it. I'm going to tell everyone.
Hey, by comparison, you're like James Bond to us. So that's what we're going with.
As I say, I'm going to take it. So look, for anyone new to the show, a quick reminder of the format. Josh and I are going to discuss a total of 4 linebackers, 4 defensive linemen. We usually talk about 4 defensive backs, but tonight we've got 2. And these guys are guys that we think are going to either produce or disappoint in week 11. But Josh, before we get into these nominations, we always kick things off on this show, as you know, by touching on an IDP storyline that is kind of doing the rounds. And the one I want to discuss this week is a talking point that was doing the rounds on X yesterday about Laiatu Latu being a flop. You being a Colts fan, I'm sure will have some strong opinions on this. The general thought process seemed to be that he was a flop because he wasn't doing as well as Jared Verse. What's your take?
So I think there are multiple layers to this. I think it is fair to say the Colts took the wrong edge rusher at pick 15 because we know Jared Verse is a dude. And that kind of certainty, I want that at pick 15 instead of the projection that we're still doing with Laiatu Latu. Now, I think Latu is going to be just fine. We've talked about this before on our show. You want to see flashes. You want to see playing time. You want to see progress from these rookie edge rushers. This is a position that is notorious for taking a long time to develop. Aiden Hutchinson, Will Anderson, some of these really highly drafted, like top 5 overall picks, took time in their rookie years, didn't really turn into these dudes until end of their rookie year, second year, third year. A lot of these guys start to break out. So not panicking at all on Latu. I think it is fair to say the Colts selected the wrong edge rusher at 15. I think it is wrong to say that he is a flop 10 games into his career. We have not seen nearly enough. Has he been disappointing for IDP? Sure. But if you are counting on Latu this early in the season, that's on you. That's malpractice on your part and bad expectations. I would have liked to seen him crack the rotation as well. Do I think he should have beat out Kwity Paye and Dayo Odengbo for more edge snaps? Yeah, but am I surprised that he hasn't? No, this is what happens. It just takes time, and we need to be patient. It is entirely possible that Latu is a flop, but we cannot make that declaration until at least third year, I think, at the earliest.
Yeah, you touched on a point that I wanted to make there about some of these other guys that do take time. Got some numbers for you. First 10 games of their career, these are the sack leaders so far. Trey Hendrickson, 14 pressures, 2 sacks. TJ Watt, 15 pressures, 4 sacks. Aiden Hutchinson, 28 and 6. Will Anderson had 2 sacks 10 games into his first rookie year. I think the takeaway is, Latu is far too premature to call him a flop. He's middle of the road in terms of his pressure rate so far. He's slightly above average in terms of his win rate. And I think the reason that he looks like a flop to some is that his finishing rate, his conversion of sacks or pressures to sacks is really low. 86th out of 95 edge rushers with a minimum of 100 pass rush snaps. So it looks like he's been a flop because he's not finishing his pressures, but we know that's a wildly inconsistent metric and that he'll catch up in that sense very soon. So, Right there with you.
And you know what helps with finishing sacks? Just more playing time, more experience, right? Being able to watch 20 games of film, 30 games of film, being able to see how these quarterbacks play, having that experience of when I see him do this, I know he's doing this. So I'm going to do this to finish off and get the sack. This is just, it's so early. And these guys just have to play. Latu is playing. It's not like this guy's not seeing the field. Yeah, it is disappointing. He's third in the edge rotation with these other guys. But keep in mind, Kwity Paye, I think, yeah, he got his fifth-year option picked up, so he'll be there next year. They got to make a decision on Odengbo. Latu's going to get the opportunity. I think we could see him as the leading snap getter at the edge position for the Colts as soon as next season. Just got to be patient.
Yep. We've just been spoiled with Nick Bosa, Micah Parsons. Who's the other guy? Oh, Verse, obviously. These guys are outliers. They're not the rule to follow. So, yeah. Look, let's move on. Enough of this. Let's go into these nominations then, Josh. And as always, we'll kick things off with the linebacker position. So I'm going to kick things off this time instead of letting my guest go first. Sorry, Josh. But I've gone with the man of the hour, Tyrice Knight. This is obviously a bit of a dangerous one because I'm putting a lot of faith in Mike McDonald's claim that Knight will get the first crack at replacing Dodson. Certainly in the last 5 games, there's been 2 full-time guys there for the Seahawks at linebacker, and we know Ernest Jones is obviously going to be an every down guy again. But the concern is that, to what extent will Drake Thomas eat into Knight's role? McDonald did say that he'd come in on certain packages. I'm going to be bold and say that Knight's going to be 75-80% snap share this week. He's been the clear favorite ahead of Thomas every week when somebody else has missed time, like Jerome Baker did in the early part of the season. So yeah, I like Knight this week. What gives me a little more confidence, I guess, than I might have otherwise is that the Seahawks play the 49ers this week. We know the 49ers have been one of the best matchups for opposition linebackers in terms of tackle efficiency and production. So yeah, I'm thinking he has a good game here. I'm starting him if I've got him. It does depend on what else I've got on my roster as well. We know 4 teams are on a bye. Had a look at it earlier on. There's 7 to 8 startable linebackers that we're missing this week. I think a week like this, it makes sense to go with Knight.
That's bold. That's spicy. I may not be as bold as you in having him as one of my starts. Anytime a change like this happens, I tend to just want to see it before I plug a guy in. So much of fantasy football is just not eating zeros, especially as these playoff races in your league start tightening up. Now, the 2 things you mentioned that I think tilt this slightly in Knight's favor is, like you said, San Francisco, great matchup for opposing linebackers. And we have seen in spurts Knight do this, right? It's not a totally unproven taking this guy out of the package, putting him on the field for the first time, right? And also, the other thing you mentioned is the bye weeks. We've got 4 teams on bye this week. And so I think if you're in a situation where you're just crushed with byes, or you have had some injuries, it sounds like Troy Anderson's going back on the shelf. DeMarvion Overshone's a little iffy. It's just that time of year where guys get banged up. Or probably what would sway me the most, if you're in a start 3 linebacker kind of league and you're an underdog and you need a big swing, put Knight in there. Right now, if I am the favorite and I'm only starting 2 linebackers, there's no way Tyrice Knight is sitting my lineup. Even if it's 3, I probably have a lot of hesitation sticking him in week 11 with his first clear opportunity now with Dodson gone. So I think it's a bold call. I think it's a spicy call. I don't think it makes sense for everyone, but I can see the rationale behind it.
You're right. Yeah, it depends on the number of starting positions you've got. As a linebacker 3, definitely as a linebacker 4, I'm on board. But yeah, take your points. So who's your guy? Which linebacker do you like this week and why?
So let's talk about Blake Straight Cashman, Vikings linebacker. Look, we love Ivan Pace Jr. in the IDP show world. We are all big fans of the Cincinnati Bearcat. But there is no denying that Cashman is the dude. We kind of wondered how this would shake out. And Cashman has been injured, but when he's healthy, he leads the Vikings snap share. He played every down in 3 of the first 5 games of the year. Heading into week 10, he was questionable after missing 4 games with a turf toe, and it seemed the Vikings eased him back in with 80% of the defensive snaps. But this week, he's not listed on the injury report at all, so I think it's fair to say he's in for an even bigger role. And kind of like what we mentioned last time with Tyrice Knight and the San Francisco 49ers, this works in his favor because the Vikings play the Titans, and the Titans have been one of the best matchups for opposition linebackers in terms of tackle volume. So if you've got Cashman rostered, insert him into your lineups with confidence. I think it hurts my heart, Jase, because I love Ivan Pace and his short little dinosaur arms and his playmaking explosive potential, but Cashman is that dude. The Vikings are telling us what they think of this linebacker rotation. I think we'd be wise to listen.
Yeah, I agree. The only thing that gives me any pause with this one whatsoever is my is my bias towards Pace. We've kind of seen him come in. Were they easing Cashman back in again? I think so. Is there a chance that Pace kind of leeches away some snaps from Cashman and keeps him at around about the 80% mark? It's a possibility. My heart, though, tells me that you're right, and he's going to be nearer 90%, 100% of the snaps this week, Cashman, and Pace is going to be the odd man out.
Yeah, it seems like I always go back, and if you need one resource to kind of catch up on the week that was, go read John Macri's IDP report over at pff.com. Worth a PFF sub alone. Wanted to see what he had to say about Cashman. Outside of the 9-snap drive where Cashman missed seemingly due to an injury, he came back in and played 100% of his team's defensive snaps from that point on, which is an indication he'll have better usage and production going forward. So you can see the to overall snap share and say, oh, what happened? But it sounds like he got dinged up, and from that point forward, he was on the field for every snap. So not on the injury report, wheels all the way up for Blake Cashman.
Got you. Let's move on to the dislikes. It makes sense, as we've just talked about Cashman, to talk about this guy. To head the dislikes, it's Ivan Pace. Surprise, surprise. And I hate choosing Ivan Pace because, as we've talked about, we all love the guy. We love watching him play. He seems to come up big. He's been much more efficient as a tackler, actually, than Cashman, but that doesn't matter. It's about opportunity, right? So, yeah, the return of Cashman hurts Pace. There's only one full-time linebacker in Flores' defense. And as you alluded to earlier on, when Cashman's healthy, he's that dude. He's the preferred choice. So, yeah, 59% snap share last week for Pace. That's not going to get it done. That's his lowest since week 5 when Cashman last played. Like I say, he's been ultra efficient, but unless he's on the field a lot, what's he going to do? He needs to have a big play, a big splash play. He has been doing that on occasion. Don't want to rely on it, though, from our linebackers. We want tackle volume, right? We want that low floor, and then those splash plays, those big plays are a bonus on top of that. So, yeah, I'm kind of fading Pace this week. I'd start someone like Knight over someone like Pace this week, and that seemed bizarre just a few weeks ago, perhaps. But yeah, even in a favorable matchup against the Titans, as we talked about in Cashman's piece a minute ago, I'm lowering my expectations on Pace this week. Josh.
Yeah, I think it's helpful, Jase, in the context of guys we dislike, to say like where's that kind of line of demarcation where we're saying I would start someone like this over an Ivan Pace. You've said Tyrice Knight. Would you start someone like an Omar Spates over Ivan Pace in week 11?
I don't know about Spates. I'm playing the waiting game with him, and it sounds like I'm at odds there with the argument I'm making for Knight, but possibly I'd find it a very close call. I know Spates played more last week than Pace did last week. Tough one. I'm on the fence.
Right? It's tough. I think for me, the tiebreaker is just always snaps, right? We can sit here and kind of project and try to figure out and game script and blah, blah, blah. And that's all fine. Like there are contributing factors to this stuff. But at the end of the day, I think we have to look at the fact that Ivan Pace had basically 59% of snaps last week. A guy like Knight, it's a question mark. A guy like Spates was up, I believe, to close to 79% of snaps this past week. Yep. So these are the kind of decisions we have to make. And 73% of snaps for Omar Spates after seemingly getting benched. So that's one of those volatile situations. Who knows what's going on there? What about with Terrell Bernard back in the mix? Dorian Williams was down to 68.8. You going Dorian Williams over Ivan Pace?
That's a bit closer for me. Williams, he's been so up and down. He's been really productive some weeks and then not at all the next, and played really well some weeks and not at all the next. Whereas, Pace has been that way to some extent as well, but yeah, I'd still probably follow the snaps. 75% to 59 is quite a gap.
Yeah, what about, here's another one. Just kind of these interesting LB2s. Yeah. Trenton Simpson or Ivan Pace?
Oh, Simpson, yeah, definitely. He's been trending way up again after that dip in the middle weeks of the season so far. But just lately, he's been 90% or above for the last 2-3 weeks, 100%. I think one of those weeks as well. So definitely Simpson.
Okay, one more. Nate Landman or Ivan Pace?
Is Anderson out this week? I believe he is.
It sounds like he re-aggravated his knee injury, and we kind of speculated last night that this could be trending toward the Falcons shutting him down for the season. We'll see. That has not been reported anywhere. I don't know that for sure, but re-aggravating the knee injury, I would say it's questionable he's going to be on the field week 11.
Yeah, in that case, I would definitely go with Landman. If Anderson was available, it would be a close call, I suppose, but no, definitely Landman if Anderson misses time.
All right. Well, this is fun. I think it's just a good exercise to go through of like, what are some guys around him? Because that's the kind of decisions our listeners and viewers are going to be making. So, look, we love Ivan Pace, and I would love to see him get closer to 75, 80% of snaps. But if he's down around 60%, that's just like, unless you're in a start 4 LB kind of league, I just don't think you can roll that guy out there.
Yeah, like I say, it hurts me to say it, hurts me to admit it, but I don't like him so much that I'm willing to take an L in fantasy just because I'm being stubborn, right? That would be stupid. That's stupidity. So,
right.
So, who is your dislike at linebacker?
So you mentioned the man of the hour, Tyrice Knight, and it's what a weird kind of incestuous situation we've seen going on with some of these linebackers, with Jerome Baker going from Miami to Seattle, then to Tennessee, and then Ernest Jones going from LA to Tennessee to Seattle. And it's just been a bit of a weird road for some of these guys this season. Now you have Tyrel Dotson going from Buffalo to Seattle to Miami. And that's why we're going to talk about Anthony Walker as a dislike this week, is because he's been a full-time guy. They benched David Long in place of Anthony Walker. And Anthony Walker is the definition of like solid, reliable. Oh, your starter is hurt. Oh, let's plug in Anthony Walker. He's a solid, reliable veteran. He's not going to screw things up. It's wrong to call him a Jag, but he's like just one little inch above Jag territory. Exactly. He's like a super Jag. So you have Anthony Walker there. He has supplanted David Long. But the addition of Tyrel Dotson, it has me worried. I think it's going to take some time for Dotson to acclimate there in Miami. But we said the same thing about Ernest Jones in Seattle, and we saw how that worked out. So it could be Dotson could be thrown straight in, and he's only had a few days to settle in, just getting picked up, I think, yesterday, Tuesday. I think Walker is probably safe for week 11, but we talked about not taking those gambles, not eating zeros. Walker's matchup, not horrible. The Raiders have been a below average matchup for opposition linebackers in terms of tackle volume, but they're middle of the table in terms of efficiency. So that doesn't really move the needle for me one way or the other, the matchup. But when it comes to kind of tearing out the different options you have, the doubt that I have in Walker's involvement due to the presence of Dodson, I'm sitting Walker down this week. I'd rather not take the risk. I understand if you're in a situation where you're just desperate and that's the best you got and you got to roll it out there, but hopefully you have better options, because now that situation, we kind of mentioned last night too on the show, like Christian Harris, what happens when he gets rolled back out with the Texans? Now that situation becomes ambiguous. What happens if Troy Anderson's knee is fine? Is it going to be a Landman, Anderson split again? There's certain situations that you just want to avoid the ambiguity until things sort themselves out. Then you can go make those decisions.
Yeah, and you're spot on with your evaluation of Walker as well. He is a touch above a Jag. I've got a bit of a hatred for Walker because he seemingly stood in the way of JOK becoming the guy that I thought he would for years there, and then just when I got rid of JOK, JOK became the guy that I assumed he would do, and I blame Walker for that. It's nothing to do with my poor judgment or my poor timing. It's entirely Anthony Walker's fault. So yes, can't hold that against him though. Like you say, he's been an every down guy the last 2 weeks. This is a really curious one because, you know, how soon will they throw Dodson into the fire? He's graded pretty well, right? He's played pretty well for the last 2 years. Better last year, admittedly, at the Bills than he has this year so far. But even so, as a coverage linebacker, and we know these coverage linebackers can stay on the field a little longer or more often, if you like, than others. He's played pretty well. So I'm curious to see how much of a run out he gets this week and how much that affects Walker. And I will say we are just assuming that Brooks is safe here. Seems to be. It would surprise me, I think, if Brooks took a hit in terms of his snap share, but it deserves a mention at least.
Yeah, I wouldn't make that assumption either. I think if you have Jordan Brooks, I have a couple degrees more confidence that he is not going to see the bench because of Tyrel Dodson. And it should be pointed out, Dodson was not cut for performance or playing issues. It's possible there was some locker room stuff going on. I don't get that sense at all. From what I've read, it was simply he had some contract incentives coming up that he was about to hit, and so they cut him loose before he was going to hit those. Cutthroat businessman. I don't know who wants to go sign with Seattle if they're going to treat their players that way, so maybe not the best long-term decision, but I don't worry about Dodson as a player like a Shaq Leonard, like, oh, he's fallen off, this guy can't cut it, or Devin White, where it's like this dude is just not got it anymore. This is not that situation. I think Dodson is going to see the field in place of Anthony Walker sooner rather than later. I don't know that it's going to be this week, but there's enough hesitancy there. Let's set him down if you can.
Yep. Right there with you. So look, let's talk about defensive line here. We've spent enough time on our linebackers. I try to avoid mentioning the elite players on this show, but the nonsense, the stupidity I feel that has been talked about Micah Parsons bothers me. So I've made an exception this week, Josh. So I'm going to talk about Micah Parsons for a little bit. Obviously, a slow start to the season, and we hate to see it because, he was undoubtedly people's first IDP taken in redraft, right? 1 sack in his first 4 games. Slightly behind where he'd normally be, quite a way behind where he'd normally be. However you look at it, it was only 4 games. And then there was the injury as well, caused him to miss 3 or 4 weeks as well. That's not what any of us wanted to see on the back of that slow start. I think that compounded the issue. But people are too quick to criticize, as we talked about earlier on with Latu, I feel. Slightly different situation, yes. But in Parsons' case, look, still 5th amongst all edges with an 18.2% pressure rate. That's fantastic. His 28.6% win rate ranks 11th. And against the Eagles last week, we know he came up big, answered his critics, 5 pressures, 2 sacks. I know their offensive line, or maybe Hurts, hasn't been quite as good at evading pressure this season as they were last year, but their tackles are no pushovers, right? So for Parsons to do that against the Eagles, I feel was impressive. This week, though, they placed the Texans, and they've allowed the most pressures and the most sacks of any team in the last 4 games. They've got a good pair of offensive tackles, Laramie Tunsil. In fact, he's better than good, right? Tunsil, he's really good. Titus Howard, a shade behind, a step behind maybe. I still think they're going to have their hands full with Parsons this week, especially when Stroud is showing some sort of, he's kind of not the player he was last year, is he, right? And certainly not in the sense of being able to avoid the pressure that does come his way. So, Josh, what say you? This feels like a no-brainer for me.
I think we could be in line for a 3-sack Micah Parsons game. I think when we're sitting here doing the Week 11 recap in this studio next week, I think we could be singing Micah Parsons' praises once again. I think we had the stat in Aaron's recap for this week that CJ Stroud is the second most quarterback on the season. And you can see it, right? You can see it when you watch Texans games that he is regressing a little bit. And I still think he's a great player. I still think the Texans have a no doubt franchise quarterback, but the path of development is not linear. And he's struggling a little bit right now in taking these sacks, creating these pressures. You know, pressures and sacks are a QB stat just as much as they are an offensive line stat.
Yep.
So I think that Parsons is – we questioned a little bit last night. Is he going to be motivated since this Cowboys team sucks? I think that's fair to ask that question because I do think there is something to be said for playing for a contender and playing for a team that's just playing out the string. The difference here is that Micah Parsons has not been paid yet. And so if there is anyone that is going to be motivated to get out there and get to the quarterback 3 times in a game, it's going to be Micah Parsons. And this intangible stuff, I think folks can kind of roll their eyes at, like, this isn't real analysis, but these are human beings playing this sport. And when you look at the matchup and you look at the context surrounding Micah Parsons coming back, you know, you've got Damian Woody on ESPN calling him a podcast boy and saying, shut up when it comes to talking about your coach. I think that stuff matters to these guys. I think they want to shut up the critics. And I think Micah Parsons, the supremely talented edge rusher, is going to be on a mission this week. And I think CJ Stroud's going to be in trouble. And I will say it's one of those things, Jase, where it's like we don't talk about studs a lot because you just start them. I guess if you're in like a start 1 DL kind of league and you've got Nick Bosa, Max Crosby, TJ Watt, Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett, or a combination thereof, maybe you're like, should I bench Micah Parsons this week? But otherwise, just shut up and enjoy the fact you've got one of the top 5 edge rushers in the NFL and for IDP.
You're absolutely right. But I will say the reason I've mentioned him here is just because I wanted the right to reply. Same with Garrett a few weeks ago, same with Latu to a lesser extent earlier in the show. Yeah, it's enough of this nonsense. I'm really glad to see Parsons come out last week and kind of, get it done. I think this week he's got an even better matchup. And like you say, we could be looking at a huge week for Parsons.
Yeah, I expect it. I think it's going to be, if he is quiet in this game, I will be shocked.
Yep. Yeah. Then I'll probably be more worried, I think. Some of those early games, whatever, 4 games, I'm not getting stressed. I'm not breaking a sweat over that, but if he doesn't do much against the Texans, then I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe there's a reason to be concerned. So you, I believe, have a somewhat more interesting, you've gone not with the low-hanging fruit as I have and come up with a guy that might surprise some.
Well, low-hanging fruit if we were having this conversation in week 1. Not low-hanging fruit now that we're here in week 11. And Rashan Gary has been a little bit of a disappointment this year. He's such a dangerous edge rusher in the last 4 years. For him to be at or below a 10% pressure rate and only 3 sacks, it's not good. That's not great, Jase. Even if 2 of those have come in the last 3 games.
Yep.
But here's the thing. They get the Bears, and the Bears cannot keep Caleb Williams clean. And some of that has been his fault. Well, quite a lot of it, actually, when you look at it. You got veterans in the locker room calling for Tyson Bagent to be the starter in Chicago. If some of these reports I don't know if I believe that, but when those start coming, those kind of rumors and whispers start coming out, it's not good. Caleb Williams has had a rough rookie season. But one of the major culprits for Caleb Williams taking all these sacks is the right tackle, Darnell Wright. He has allowed the most pressures and the most sacks on the team, and it just so happens that Gary spends the majority of his time on the left edge, which will mean he'll see a fair amount of Wright this week. This may be Gary's best chance to deliver big this season. So I think despite the underwhelming start so far, it's reasonable to nominate him as one of our starts of the week in week 11. What say you, Jase?
Yeah, I really hope so. you're right in your entire evaluation there. But from a very selfish personal standpoint, I took a fair amount of Gary. I felt like he was underrated. Certainly going into last season, after he missed a bit of time and only finished with like 6-7 sacks, came back double-digit sacks again last year. Where has he been this season? And it's not just, and we talk about these underlying metrics, the pressure rate, the win rate, these sorts of things. He's not great in those categories. So it's not like he's just been unlucky. It's not like he's producing a bunch of sacks and a bunch of pressures and not getting a load of sacks. He's just not playing very well, and it surprises me. I was wondering earlier on about Gary, and I was thinking this seems to me like one of those stories where you'll find out at the end of the season, I've been playing with such and such an injury. The drop-off is that steep that it makes me wonder what else is up. You talked about these guys being human beings. Maybe there's something behind the scenes that we're not aware of that's affecting him. This is the level to which we've got to, because he's been so good for a number of years now, and the drop-off this year has been steep. But that said, and the point I'll end on is that, this is the Bears, right? So you start any of your defensive linemen, edge rushers against the Bears. It was the same way with the Browns earlier in the season with Deshaun Watson. Now it's the Bears. Lately it's been the Texans. And we'll probably repeat, other players playing in these similar matchups in the forthcoming weeks as well, because, like you say, these guys can't keep these quarterbacks upright, and these quarterbacks can't evade pressure that does come their way.
Yeah, there's several factors that go into deciding which defensive lineman to start. If a guy's playing well, like a Dante Fowler, you're like, I can't sit this guy down, right? Mm-hmm. Even with the limited snap share. So I think performance is part of it. The thing that we like to look at the most is, of course, playing time, right? That's any position on the field, offense or defense. You need the guy to be out there to make plays. Can't make plays on the bench. The underlying metrics are a big part of it for defensive linemen, because so much of what they do is down to luck, down to variance. And so if they're doing the things that lead to success and that success isn't coming, that tells you that success is coming, because it's just the law of averages. When you have a 18, 19, 20% pressure rate, but you don't have the sacks yet, they're coming, and they're probably coming in bunches. And so Rashan Gary, unfortunately, doesn't check a lot of those boxes. The production has not been there. The underlying metrics have not been there. You mentioned the gruesome injury season. That's like my favorite time of the off season, when I was playing with a decapitated head for half the season. Nobody knew. I think I carried it off pretty well. They always have these gruesome injuries that nobody ever heard about, during the season. And now all of a sudden you're telling me you had a shredded meniscus for half the year. Like, why did we not know this? I think that sometimes we talked about this with like Josh Hines-Allen a little bit. Myles Garrett was we were talking about that a little bit with him. Danielle Hunter, I know, has been talked about a little bit this season as well. Just variance, right? These are 17-game seasons. You think about how long NBA and MLB seasons are. 17 games is not a big sample size. Not a big sample size. And so the variance you can see within that sample can feel like a guy is just not good anymore. And it turns out he's just on the wrong side of variance for a little stretch there. Rashan Gary is not that type of player right now. But the other factor we have to consider with our DL matchups is who they're playing. And it doesn't matter if Rashan Gary has been a bit of a bum this season, both production-wise and underlying metrics-wise. You get Caleb Williams across that offensive line, you got to roll Rashan Gary out there.
Oh, yeah. Easy. All day, every day. Same with, as I say, the same with the Texans for the time being. The Titans are kind of being one of those teams as well for what seems like a couple of seasons now. You get these matchups, you got to start your players. Gary, disappointing, but this is the week for him to wake up. We say he's had 2 sacks in the last 3 games, but if you watch those games, he hasn't really stood out as a dangerous edge rusher in the sense that he was in seasons past. This week, I feel like this is his opportunity, Josh.
It is. I want to see something. Show us something here, Rashan Gary.
He needs to reward me. I've invested in him. He's disappointed my teams across the board. Now is the time, Gary. Show me what you're made of.
We've done everything we can here, Rashan. Now it's your turn. You need to take the torch and run with it, buddy.
Do it. Right, so defensive lineman we dislike, Josh. I'm pumping the brakes on Will McDonald this week, and it's it's bold, right? His breakout season has been wonderful to watch. He deserves massive amount of credit for what he's done. It's only his second year, remember, but he's got no sacks in the last 3 games. And I've noticed that since Reddick has come back, McDonald's spent most of his time on the right edge. He has been bringing pressure at a reasonable rate since switching over to that edge, but no sacks. Maybe he's just getting used to being on that position or in that position on that side of the line. Being on the right side means he's going to face Bernard Raymond, and Raymond has been the better of the 2 tackles this year. Only 15% of the pressure Flacco has faced have been allowed by Raymond versus 27% by Braden Smith at right tackle. And that surprised me when I looked it up because in my mind, Smith's the better tackle, right? But yeah, that's not the case this year. It also doesn't help McDonald's cause that his snap share has dipped a bit. It's not a huge dip. It's not reason enough on its own to fade him this week, but it has gone from 68, 72, 66 before Reddick returned to 61, 61, and most recently 54. And I think that combined with the tough matchup is enough to scare me off a little bit this week. So, yeah, it's a good week, I think, to sit McDonald. Appreciate why people will probably turn their noses up to this idea. He's been great, but yeah, it's about matchup. Things are not trending in the best direction for him, I feel.
And what's your feeling now with the news that just came out earlier today that the Colts are going back to Anthony Richardson now in this matchup?
That does improve things a little bit. I mean, Flacco's a statue, but Richardson doesn't have the pocket presence and awareness of pressure that Flacco does. I didn't look at the pressure rates for Richardson when writing this up, but I suspect, in fact, I'd be very surprised if he didn't struggle against pressure. You know this as a Colts fan, right? You watch him; he doesn't seem to have that mindfulness of what's going on around him in the same way that Flacco does.
Yeah, he definitely has a ways to go in terms of developing his pocket presence, which I think is maybe a little better than he gets credit for, but he's also just an absolute, superhuman back there.
Oh, yeah.
The play he tapped out on that led to this whole debacle was he had shrugged off a 300+ pound defensive tackle and run about 50 yards to gain maybe 3. So I think it's an X factor in the equation here. If the protection is not there, Flacco's either throwing the ball away or he's going down because he's got concrete shoes at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what worries me most about McDonald in this matchup is the snap share. I want to see guys, edge rushers. There are exceptions, right? I just mentioned Dante Fowler, who's not really playing more than 50% of the snaps, but sometimes you just got to ride a heater. 54% of the snaps is concerning. And you have the Hassan Reddick thing, the wild card, or what's his snap share going to look like as the season goes along? They get him in the building, waive all these fines, make him whole contract-wise after, whatever that stunt was that he pulled this season. So you got to figure they're motivated to get this guy on the field. So, yeah, it's kind of like, to a lesser extent, sort of the Blake Cashman, Ivan Pace dilemma of or Tyrell Dodson, Anthony Walker dilemma. What is this other guy going to do to this player's snap share as the weeks go along? I don't think it would surprise. Would it surprise you if, let's look up 3 weeks from now, Hassan Reddick is leading this team in snaps at the edge position? Or do you think it's going to remain McDonald entrenched ahead of Reddick?
Well, it's tough, right? And I was going to ask you this because I'm not avoiding your question, but we know McDonald is an out-and-out pass rusher, right? He offers very little in run defense. But it's not like... what confuses me is why is Michael Clemens leading this group?
I was just looking at that.
Share? It's baffling. It's not like he is some sort of elite run defender. It's not like he's some sort of an elite pass rusher. I don't get it. So... come on, Jets. Just put McDonald out there. Put Reddick out there. That's what we all want.
We're looking at Will McDonald from last week, 0%. Michael Clemens from last week, 0% pressure rate, 7.1% win rate, Will McDonald, 26.7% in both categories. That courtesy of John's IDP report. What are we doing here, guys? Like, the season is on life support. It's dead at this point. You got to probably hope for like a miracle resuscitation. But even if that's the case too, like, you could make the case, well, let's just roll Will McDonald out there and get the young guy some reps if this season's pretty much over at this point. But yeah, not a great matchup. And just the snaps, I want to see that tick back up a little bit. It's going in the wrong direction. So that for me is enough alone to say, let's pump the brakes on McDonald again. If you're starting 4 defensive linemen in like a sleeper DL kind of league, maybe you roll him out there. Maybe he's in a flex or something like that. But start 2 defensive ends, yeah, not rolling McDonald out this week.
For sure. Right, Josh, let's talk some DBs. Here's a guy that I've wanted nothing to do with whatsoever in IDP ever since he came into the league, 3-4 years ago now? Tre'von Moehrig. He gets the nod for me this week. It's kind of fun, as I say, because I've wanted nothing to do with him, but he's on track for his most productive season yet. He's 23rd out of 102 safeties in terms of tackle efficiency. Missed only 6.1% of his tackle attempts, which is really impressive. Easily his career best so far. And he's had 34 combined tackles in his last 4 games. So for as good as he's been, he's actually heating up a little bit. Part of his improvement, his production, has been because he's been playing in the box a lot more than we've previously seen him do. I looked it up. In his rookie year, Josh, he played only 5% of his snaps in the box. He was on an island back there, deep safety, miles from the play. I know that sometimes we can read into this too much, but there are those guys out there, the Jesse Bates, the Micah Fitzpatricks, these guys that still produce even though they are predominantly deep safeties. Moehrig wasn't one of those guys. He couldn't produce when he was back there. Now he's playing in the box a lot more. 43% of his snaps this year are either in the box or up on the defensive line. That's a huge uptick, and I think it's no coincidence that we're seeing him produce his best statistical season so far. I have thought about mentioning him in previous weeks. I'm not late to the game. I've just been waiting for the right matchup. This is that week. The Raiders play the Dolphins. They've been one of the best matchups for opposition safeties in terms of tackle production. And I've noticed that's been especially true when Tua has been in at quarterback. So I think Moehrig has a great shot to produce this week. Really like him. I picked him up in a few leagues. Josh, where do you stand on him?
Yeah, I love it. I have been trying like crazy to replace Micah Fitzpatrick as my second safety in our main dynasty league. I have Brandon Jones, who's been fine as like a safety 1-2 option. And I picked up Moehrig off of waivers a couple weeks ago, and I have been riding with him ever since. And it is so nice to finally have Micah Fitzpatrick out of the lineup because he was been such a bum this year. And yeah, it's one of those things where it's sort of reminds me a little bit of like Nick Cross. And like, are we sure? Like, is Tre'von Moehrig really this guy? Can we really depend on this guy for IDP purposes? I think it's hard to drop those priors sometimes, these beliefs that we have, right? We anchor down into these first impressions we have of players, and it's hard to shake that. But Nick Cross and Tre'von Moehrig both have done some major career revitalization this season, and I think we'd be wise to forget our priors and just ride these guys for as long as they keep giving us production. Mike has Tre'von Moehrig as his safety 11 this week going against the Dolphins. So I'm with it. I think as long as Moehrig is healthy, he is a top 12, top 15 option rest of the season.
And let me ask you this then, Josh. So you talked about changing your mind, like forgetting about those priors. Do you find yourself, like I do, being more willing to do that with defensive backs than any other position in IDP?
Yes, because the turnover is so much higher at defensive backs that I think if you anchor down into that belief, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. Things change so quickly. And it is such a volatile position because it depends in large part on things that are fluky. Not every DB is going to be like Nick Cross, where he somehow was leading the league in tackles there for a minute. A lot of what these guys do is going to be based on PDs. That's why we love slot cornerbacks so much, is because they're more apt to make tackles than your typical like deep safeties are. So I think you have to be willing to change your mind, because every position is in the NFL is hard to learn and hard to be good at. But safety, cornerback, DB in general just turns over and changes so much. Like, look at Budda Baker. Budda Baker was top 3 dynasty safety there a few years back, had a big time dip. The shine was really off that star, and now he is back as, probably the safety 1 or 2 for the rest of the year, and his dynasty stock has gone way back up. So I think if you had come into the Budda Baker experience like last year or the year before and said, why is everyone so high on this Budda Baker guy? This dude is not that good. You may have missed out on a tremendous Budda Baker season. So I think it's important to keep an open mind on a lot of these players and hold loosely to the opinions that we have, because we're going to be wrong a lot. We're going to be right a lot too, but we're going to be wrong a lot too. So don't hold too tightly to those opinions and those impressions that you make of players, especially young players.
Oh, you're speaking my language. Yeah, especially those young guys. Things change. And if we get things wrong, we'll hold our hands up and say, you know what, we got that wrong. We were premature. We were too early to either criticize or crown that guy. I feel that's really important, that accountability. But yes, things change often, even within season, not just from season to season, even within season. And yeah, especially so at defensive back. I'm a little less prone to changing my mind about defensive linemen. I feel like that's where talent really comes into play. And by that, I mean both defensive tackles and those edge guys. Talent trumps all for me at defensive line. But yeah, linebackers, it's about opportunity. Defensive backs, I stream them in pretty much all my leagues, unless there's those leagues where there's very little on the waivers.
I think the dangerous thing with linebackers especially is falling into this trap of like early production from LBs, thinking that these guys are good, right?
Yep.
It's kind of like the Devin White example I mentioned earlier, or the Shaq Leonard example, and you could probably mention a dozen other linebackers that fit into this category, right? Of like, you can start really well and then fall off. Anyone can have one good season. I think linebacker has gotten harder to play in the NFL, but I think anchoring into those beliefs that somebody is really, really good can be dangerous, because variance can hit, new coaching scheme can hit. You just have to be careful getting out a little over your skis with certain players. Just try to stay kind of in the middle on most guys, especially young guys, because guys can get better and guys can get worse. Like I said earlier, the path of progression is not linear with these quarterbacks, and that's true for every position. So just be patient, be humble, and accept new information as it comes in. You're doing yourself a disservice as a fantasy manager if you're not reacting and planning and accounting for new information. For sure.
Right, Josh, tell me which DB we dislike this week and why.
So this may come as a little bit of a surprise. We mentioned Budda Baker as kind of a career resurgence. The same could be said for Jalen Pitre, who was the dynasty DB1, maybe for some people after his rookie season, came back to earth in a big way last year. But the role change has been so good for him. We talked about it last night on the IDP show. Essentially now the slot corner nickelback for the Texans. Now, what has been trending in the wrong direction, and while I'm advising caution this week, is because week 9, season low, 83% snap share for Pitre. Week 10, 78%. And the 3-man safety looks that Matt Burke has employed became a 4-man rotation with Eric Murray, Jimmy Ward, and Kalen Bullock. Pitre did tie Murray with the lead in snaps amongst those 4, and he had the most snaps in the box. But even so, we don't like having this many cooks in the kitchen, Jase. And he's coming off the field for almost a quarter of all defensive snaps. That's not great. But the biggest thing that gives me pause, the Texans play the Cowboys this week. The Cowboys aren't a horrible matchup for opposition safeties, at least in terms of tackle production, but they are still below average. So it's not a great matchup. We have this emerging rotation of these four guys, Eric Murray, Jimmy Ward, Kalen Bullock, and Jalen Pitre. So you look at, I know Justin Varnes and Johnny the Greek talked about this on the last episode of IDP Bets, arrows up or arrows down for players. When you're making bets, when you're making lineup decisions, which way are the arrows facing? And it's just a lot of arrows facing down for Pitre just this week. We've got a lot of good full-time DB options. We featured Ugo Amadi, the Saints' new slot cornerback, right? There's these guys that pop up every single week. And especially if you're in sleeper leagues that just have the DB label, you're going to have tons of options out there. Not saying that you bench Pitre. I think he slides down. We're having these conversations. It's important to just think of it as a sliding scale. It's not a binary start this guy, sit this guy. It's always context specific. And we're talking more about adjusting expectations and sliding them down, fading them down the ranks a little bit. That's what I would advocate for with Pitre this week.
Yeah. I'm kind of out on Pitre, to be honest with you. I don't see the tackle volume. I don't really see the big plays there. Pass breakups, depending on how you score those in your league, might push him up a little bit. But I think in the vast majority of leagues, you're kind of looking for that tackle volume. He's not horrible in that sense, Josh. But he is under that sort of that 10% mark, quite a way under that 10% mark, which is what I'm kind of looking for, someone close to it. Yeah, I feel like he's more name than he is producer in IDP these days. And I know there are those people out there that will feel very differently to me. But I'm steadfast in my belief. I'm trading him actually where I've got him because I feel like a lot of people are still holding on to what he did in that first season. And I feel like he's one of few defensive backs who could like garner something in a trade. So yeah, I'm kind of out on Pitre. I'm not starting him anywhere. I don't have him anywhere.
Yeah, I think it's not, well, he was getting drafted too high this offseason. I think even with the disappointing 2023, he was still going way too high by our ADP, which I'll pull up here. But anytime you can make a profit on selling DBs, I think you should. Yeah, he was safety 18, DB 23. So he's a top 24 DB, which was just way, way, way too high. So anytime you can make a profit, this is good. Like what we've seen this season from Pitre is a good thing. It is an arrow up situation compared to where he was. Now, has he returned to that 2022 form? No, he has not. Will he ever return to that 2022 form? Probably not. That may be the best season we ever see from Jalen Pitre. So yes, if you can make a profit selling Jalen Pitre for, what are you selling him for? You selling him for a third?
Anything. That's a lie. I wouldn't sell him for anything. I'd easily sell him for a mid-round pick.
I would need at least a third because I think he has that name value. And I think if you sell him for less than that, you're selling low. I think that you can get some, because people just, again, anchoring bias. We just talked about it. People are still anchored in, well, look what he did just 2 years ago. This season's been better. There's better seasons right around the corner. Maybe that's true. Or maybe we're in for just a roller coaster type of career with Jalen Pitre. I think anytime you can capitalize on the name outstripping the production in fantasy football, you should cash out.
Okay.
If a player's name exceeds their game, take that profit. And I think Pitre is in that bucket right now because he's done just enough this year to regain and recapture some of that excitement and buzz among people who are like, I told you he wasn't a bust. Go sell him to that person for a third round pick and thank us later.
Mm-hmm. Here's a pretty damning stat on Pitre before we move on, but 7 of his 10 games, he's had 4 or fewer solo tackles. That doesn't spell consistency to me. I'm kind of out on the guy.
It makes me wonder
Four-man rotation.
How the hell did he ever rack up that many tackles his rookie year? Because he was playing deep safety primarily. We looked it up last night.
Yeah.
And there really wasn't a reason that he should have had this tremendous drop off. He had the same kind of alignment year 2 that he did to year 1.
Yep.
It was just an outlier. You see this sometimes, right? We talked about Justin Matabikwe, now Nnamdi Matabikwe, having 13 sacks, probably the most sacks he's ever going to have in his entire career in one season. It just happens. Sometimes all the stars just align for these players. I don't think we're ever getting back to that 2022 high with Jalen Pitre.
No. Did you have him in any leagues towards the end of that rookie year when he just blew up?
I might have. It was one of those where you kind of felt something special was happening. I know he was getting a lot of like IDP MVP type of buzz, for us. So, I think I don't have him anywhere right now. So I can tell you if I did, I cashed out. And I think if you cashed out off that 2022 high, you're feeling pretty good. Because even if you like Jalen Pitre, sell the outlier. We said this with Bobby Okereke, 100% of snaps, LB3 finish, I think it was, by Big 3 scoring. Cash out, sell that outlier season. That's hard to do. A DB getting that many tackles playing from a deep safety position primarily is the outlier of outliers.
Yeah, get rid. Look, Josh, so the nominations are in, and we have come to the end of the show. All that leaves me with is to thank you for dropping by. It's been an absolute pleasure to share the space with you and pick your brains about some IDP players. Now, I sometimes mention how our audience will already know some of our guests and where to find them and their content. But in your case, that is especially true. So with you, I want you to speak, if you will, on some of the exciting content that the IDP show have to offer to our subscribers this year. A little plug, if you will.
Absolutely. Happy to do that. YouTube.com/@the-IDP show. You're watching this show right now. Thank you. Leave us a thumbs up. Leave us a subscribe. We have 4 episodes going up every single week on the channel. The Sunday morning live stream with Jeff Pomazal and a rotating cast of characters over there answering your lineup questions. We have the recap episode, myself, Adam, and Bobby. You do this episode with some tremendous guests previewing the week to come. And then we have IDP Bets on Friday with Johnny and your favorite degenerates talking tackle and sack props. Over at theidpshow.com, we have waivers and rankings from the Green Dot King, Mike Wohlert, for paid supporters. We have the Cornerback Corner article. Johnny the Greek has been on literal fire here recently. 7 ideal calls last week, 7 hits. Just incredible work. We have Scott Soltis doing the same sort of setup for defensive end, defensive tackle, his streaming DL article. It actually just dropped about 15 minutes ago. You can read that for free over at theidpshow.com. And Jeff Pomazal has the IDP update. Look, if you've just got 5-6 minutes to catch up on the IDP news, go check out the IDP update. And so much good content on there. We used to do the game-by-game recap, Jase, on our podcast. It was a little too cumbersome for like a podcast format. So Aaron has taken that over an article format this year, 4,000 plus words every single week, recapping all the news you need to know from every single game. So lots of good stuff. And of course, if you love Mike Wohlert, you know the Green Dot article every single week, first thing Monday morning, usually by like 9 a.m. Central, that thing is going out with all the linebacker news. So we know y'all love linebackers. We know you love Mike. So get in there and check it out. We got all sorts of stuff coming y'all's way.
We do, and it covers all bases as well. So everything you need for IDP is right here. And Josh, that was a fantastic plug. But also, every word you spoke is the truth. Everything you need is right here. Josh, again, thank you very much. It's been a blast, my man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jase. Let's do it again. This is fun.
Absolutely. As Josh said, a big thank you to our audience. And please, if you found this helpful, please subscribe to our channels to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes. I'll see you again for the Week 12 IDP preview next week. And until then, go forth and dominate your Week 11 matchups. Bye for now.
This was the IDP After Show.